Hello and a very warm welcome to the channel. I have got another history rap video for you today. So this is from the OverSimplified channel, which is a fantastic little channel. Well, it's not really a little channel, is it? It's a huge channel. I'm a little channel. But it's a fantastic channel. I've done a lot of their videos before, but there are still a few left, which I'm now going through. It is the French Revolution Oversimplified Part 1. Now, I know a little bit about the French Revolution. I kind of know the basics, the storming of the Bastille, the Great Terror, Robespierre. I think I butchered that pronunciation. but there's a lot for me to learn, so I'm very excited. Before I go, please do smash that subscribe button, as YouTubers say, or indeed hit it at like a normal level of aggressiveness. It doesn't actually bother me too much which. I'd like to get to 15,000 subscribers before I die. That's possibly a realistic target, but before I die. And I'm expecting to live a couple more weeks, so let's see if we can get there. And now let's watch the video.
This video was made possible by NordVPN. Get protected by clicking the link below and get an amazing 75% off. That's only $2.99 per month with an additional month free for a limited time. Also,
I don't know if that offer still applies, but hey, go check it out. Let's support the channel.
French Revolution merch available now in the store,
Yay!
including King Louis and Marie Antoinette character pins, complete with detachable heads, just like the real thing.
Dude, that's dark. That is too soon. Give it, I reckon, another 2 centuries, and that'll be an appropriate joke. No, I want to check this out. I'm genuinely tempted.
So I said to the Marquis de la Fufayette, "What do you think I am? Some dirty peasant? I've never worked a day in my life." Wow, that Marie Antoinette sure is pretty. Sure is. Wouldn't want to be Prince Louis, though. That's going to be a lot of responsibility when he becomes king, especially since France is in financial ruin. Quite. Thank you one and all for attending the royal marriage of my grandson, the future king of France, to the Archduchess of Austria. Now for the very...
So, as you can see, so many marriages in this era, and especially kind of the Middle Ages, were political. They weren't marriages of love. They were, and you can clearly see huge political advantages of marrying into the Austrian royal family in this case.
Awkward yet historically accurate part of the ceremony, where we all watch them get into bed together.
Yes. So one of the reasons why this happened in several cultures is it was so important to prove that the royal couple were, how should I put it, doing their business. Because there was always a problem with conspiracy theories. I mean, everyone loves a conspiracy theory to this day. And during the kind of the Middle Ages, during the time when the kings and queens still had real power, there was a constant conspiracy theory that their children were not really their children. So either they were smuggled in via a bedpan was one, or that the father wasn't the king, etc. So proving that they were quote unquote sleeping together was essentially a way of saying that their offspring are likely to be legitimately their offspring.
All right, now that's out of the way. Let's leave the royal couple to it.
Yeah, thank you.
Listen, air, you fat, ill-bred boy. Nighty-night.
Okay, that dude has got some daddy issues.
Be a lot of responsibility. France is in financial ruin. You fat, ill-bred boy. Quite. That's going to be a lot of responsibility. France is in financial ruin.
I've never felt this sorry for Louis XVI before. If he gets chronically bullied by his own family before and then gets watched going to bed with his wife and then has his head cut off, that's a pretty tragic story. There's probably more to it though. Yes. Feel your pain, man.
Oh, great. He's a freaking weirdo.
Oversimplified.
France, the most prosperous, cultured, and beautiful nation in the world, as it had been for centuries. And
I mean, we'll take that. Britain a close runner-up, let's say. Probably pushing my luck there.
Exquisite social culture, with the king and the upper classes throwing crazy parties every night, enjoying high living and fine dining. Who cares that they were only able to do so off the backs of the hard-working, starving poor? What are they gonna do? Revolt?
Yeah.
They're only 80% of the population. No. Life in France is great. What's that, France? You want to go to war with...
Of course, this wasn't unique to France. This was the case across almost all of Europe at this time. Was you had essentially a very oppressive monarchy, which was a very small portion of the population, but spent a fairly high proportion of the wealth.
Britain and increase your power? Go for it, little buddy. You do you. And you lost. Now you're in severe financial debt. We have no money. What do? Should we stop partying? Heck no. Party harder. That's okay. The peasantry will pick up the slack. They were created by God to do all the work, and you were created to reap all the benefits and party hard. That's just how society works, and we've all just accepted it for centuries. Why? Why what? Why do the nobility get to be all rich and stuff? Just because they were born into it? And the rest of us schmucks just have to accept that? Hell, why do we even need a king? Who decided that? It all just seems very unfair and unequal, and I, for one, am starting to question it. Wow, that's very enlightened of you.
Now, please stop spilling beer on me.
And so began...
I'm really interested. So these are obviously kind of the revolutionaries. My assumption, I don't know much about the period, is they probably weren't drawn directly from the peasantry. Most kind of revolutionary leaders tend to be from the middle class, sometimes the urban working class. But I assume they're probably quite urban. It was probably professional occupations that provided a lot of the revolutionaries. I don't know that for certain, but that's certainly the case in the Russian Revolution, which I do know a lot more about. So it'd be really interested. If you know, please clarify in the comments. I'd be really interested.
And the Age of Enlightenment. Great philosophical thinkers across France and beyond began to question whether this beautiful nation was really all that beautiful. After all, hey Prince Louis, bad news.
Challenging the beauty of France. It's a disgrace.
Your grandpa died of smallpox this morning, which means, good news, you're now the king. So just to sum up, France is in severe financial debt, and the angry populace are beginning to question how necessary you are. But hey, I believe in you, champ. You got this. Maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Prince Louis Capet became King Louis XVI in May 1774. He was a notoriously weak man, and he knew it. He barely had the wisdom to rule a nation, never mind one in crisis, and he was easily manipulated by those around him. One of his first acts was to try to get revenge on the British by financing their American colonies' revolution.
Yeah.
Hey, we're an independent nation now. That was real swell of you.
So this is one of the points where the American Revolution becomes huge, not just in North American politics, but in European politics. Because the American Revolution, both partly inspired and partly provoked the French Revolution, i.e. it pushed France even further into debt as France and Spain and the Netherlands came into war on the American side. So you can see how it's a huge event, not just in America, but in Europe as well.
Hey, Louis, couldn't have done it without you. Glad I could help. So hey, about all that money we lent you, when can we get that back? Yep, you're a great guy.
Yes.
I'll never forget what you've done for us. Real glad I could help, friend, but about that money, gotta go now, chum. Best of luck to you. And now, France...
Like, America's done so well out of France. Between the initial help for independence and the Louisiana Purchase, which is a colossal amount of territory for very little money. And the Statue of Liberty, of course. Yeah, America's done really well out of France. You should go and buy some more Macrons or something as a thank you.
Was in even more debt. France's poor, suffering under the strain of economic ruin, watched as the nobility continued to live as though nothing was wrong.
Sorry, I promised not to dance on this channel, and I broke that promise. I have failed in every possible respect.
Grew increasingly disdainful of the Queen, Marie Antoinette, as she continued to spend all of France's money on her own luxurious lifestyle and fashion. While the peasants were breaking their backs in the fields, she was walking around like, hey, my hair is a boat.
Yes.
I'm not making that up. Her hair really was a boat. And her lavish spending earned her the nickname...
Oh, that is bloody impressive, to be fair. Like, I've never seen... I'd bring back that hairstyle, that's what I say. Get rid of this boring crap I've gone for. Everyone has a boat on their head. Why not? Or bankrupt the country again.
Madame Deficit. And speaking of the Queen, there was also a long-standing scandal around the fact that the king took a very long time to boink her, and the working classes of Paris began ridiculing the royal couple with lewd pamphlets depicting the Queen as a court thought, and the king as a wuss, unable to fulfill his marital duty. Respect for the monarchy was at an all-time low, as France's finance...
Cutting Louis XVI's head off is one thing, but mocking him for that is over the line, mate.
were spiraling out of control, and the king and his aides really only had one solution to the crisis. Tax the poor. Tax the poor. We could do a sexy calendar sheet. Tax the poor. And so
imagine how different history would have been if they'd done that sexy calendar sheet.
it was. The poor, who were already struggling to make ends meet, found themselves being taxed from every direction. Hey, I'm the royal tax collector. Looks like you've yet to pay your income tax, head tax... By the way, how many windows you got in that house of yours? 3? Oof. going to be a tax for that. Hey, your local priest here, have you paid your church tithe yet? Well, at least this one is going to the good work of God. Sure. God,
Yeah.
I think this year God wants me to buy a new swimming pool. Hey, private tax collector here. Oh, and I brought some goons with me. Just a few quick questions. How much salt did you buy this year? About 7 kilos, I think? Yep. Okay, there's going to be a tax for that. Oh, what's that over there? And that's extra salt I held over from last year, so I wouldn't have to buy as much this year. Oh, yeah, there's a tax for that. And what are you doing with all this salt? Well, obviously cooking. Mm-hmm. On the table. Yep. And preserving fish and meat. Oh no. Yep, and there's a tax for that. Hey, how old is he? He's 9. And so he's purchased his required amount of salt for this year, right? What? No, he's not.
Well, let's just say it's definitely salt. Okay, we can all agree on that, and there's no dispute at all. And I'm not going any further into that conversation.
9. Uh-oh, sorry, little Timmy. Looks like I'm gonna have to tax you for that.
Ah.
Yep, salt. There's gonna be a tax for that. And that's not all. A huge portion of the peasants' harvest had to be given up. And there was also the labor tax, where peasants were required to work a certain number of days for their local lord without pay.
Of course, it's worth remembering this is not unusual across Europe. I mean, this is very similar systems in place, varying somewhat across Europe. Some are even tougher. So in Russia, where you still had serfdom at this point, where essentially peasants were slaves. They were property of their landowner, which wasn't quite the case in France. And obviously, though, in fact, they were still horrendously oppressed. But so France was not the most oppressive country in Europe. It was just every country in Europe was oppressive to some extent.
Obviously, people weren't too happy with these taxation policies, and the aggressive nature of these private tax farmers sometimes even escalated to violence. In particular, though, the people really hated how inconsistent the taxation rules were across the nation, and also the fact that the first 2 estates often had to pay very little, if any, tax at all. And so, the anger continued to grow. France had a population that was just about ready to explode. What could push them over the edge? How about a touch of natural disaster? A series of harsh summers and winters left the peasants' harvests in ruin, meaning they had no food or money, and the cost of bread skyrocketed. Of course, the upper classes had massive stocks of grain and wheat, so they were virtually untouched by this new crisis. But now the poor really were starving, and they began to riot.
And so many revolutions throughout history have begun with bread riots. I mean, to some extent, the Russian Revolution did that. That was one of the big causes.
Women took to the streets.
And again, in the Russian Revolution, it was women protesting who were one of the key initiators of the February Revolution. So it's kind of, I'm getting a lot of parallels between the French and Russian revolutions, which I'm doubtless going to continue to make until I annoy you all that you stop watching. But I think that's valid.
Bakeries were raided, and bakers suspected of keeping bread for themselves were sometimes even hanged.
Ugh.
Wow, this is really getting out of control. Your Majesty, we need some decisive action. You need to step up and lead us. What will you do? Okay, I've got this. I know. I'll summon the Estates General.
Yeah, do
and
that.
They'll decide what to do. You really are a fat, ill-bred boy. The Estates General was the closest thing France had to a government, apart from the king. It was a purely advisory body and was rarely summoned. In fact, it hadn't been summoned for 175 years.
Wow.
Did this. But with France in a severe crisis, the king felt the time was right to call on the government to help. The Estates General was made up of representatives from the 3 estates, that is, the clergy, the nobility, and everybody else. Okay, thanks for coming, everyone.
So that's interesting, actually. If you go back a little bit, the 3rd estate includes wealthy business owners, I think it said.
The Estates General was made up of representatives from the 3 estates.
It's not just so lawyers, wealthy business owners, middle class. So I think part of the problem for the French aristocracy was that they pissed off not just the peasants who couldn't really do much about it, but they pissed off kind of the urban middle class, the urban bourgeoisie, to use a Marxist term, and that's a naturally very revolutionary force.
Okay, thanks for coming, everyone. The first order of business is regarding the clergy and nobility. You all get brand new Porsches. You get a Porsche, and you get a Porsche, and you get a Porsche. Everybody gets a Porsche.
I think this is only like a slight exaggeration of what actually happened.
And now into the second order of business. France is completely out of money.
Yeah.
Like, it's never been this bad before. Anyone got any ideas? How about we all get Lamborghinis next time? The king decided that in order to make a decision, they had to come up with a voting system. Okay, the clergy. You have a population of 130,000, so you'll get 1 vote. The nobility. You have a population of 350,000, so you'll also get 1 vote.
Okay.
And the third estate, you have a population of 27 million people and make up 98% of the population.
I think I can see where this is going.
Very impressive. You'll get 1 vote.
Yes.
The third estate were obviously pretty unhappy with this system because they kept on finding that this would happen. We propose to raise taxes on the third estate. All in favor? All opposed?
I can see the flaw. I can see the flaw in this system.
2 to 1. Taxes will be raised on the third estate. We propose a motion that says the first 2 estates are a bunch of poo-poo heads. All in favor? All opposed? 2 to 1. It's official. We are not poo-poo heads.
Yay!
The third estate realized that any attempt at reform would be outvoted by the 2 upper estates, and they thought that was kind of lame. So they decided that since they were 98% of the population, they could go off to form their own government, make their own laws, and take over the running of the country.
Okay.
And so, the National Assembly was born. The third estate was now in control, and there was nothing the king could do to stop. Ha! I've locked you all out of your building. What are you going to do about it? We'll probably go find a different building that isn't locked. Ow, no! The National Assembly did find another unlocked building, just down the road, an indoor tennis court, where on the 20th of June 1789, they all took the tennis court oath, pledging to continue meeting until the king finally gave in to their demands for more equality and economic reform. This new National Assembly included many of the most educated members of the Third Estate, including 2 young lawyers by the names of Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton. Some members of the first 2 estates even joined their cause. Some of these men formed a radical new political party called the Jacobin Club and quickly became leading figures, while many members of the Third Estate simply wanted more equality.
So this is the key point. So we've now got an almost dual power situation. So we've got the official parliament, if you can call it a parliament, which is obviously horrendously rigged under the king, and we've got this kind of second assembly. And the second assembly, by its very existence, I suppose, is a challenge to the authority of the official parliament. It's kind of similar to how in the Russian Revolution, the Petrograd Soviet, just by its existence, was a challenge to the authority of the provisional government. A kind of dual power scenario.
A growing number in this Jacobin faction would begin calling for something even crazier, the removal of the king entirely. And this is where fear began to take hold. With such a volatile situation developing, everyone was afraid of something. The king feared his position was under threat, and he called in the military to take position around Paris. The Third Estate heard rumor of the gathering military force, and they feared the king was planning to round them up and arrest them. Maybe he'd even execute them. It also didn't help that the king had just dismissed France's popular finance minister, who had been trying to make reforms himself. It seemed the king was done negotiating. Fear, left unchecked, often boils over into anger, and anger detonates with violence.
It should be hatred. I could have sworn he was going to quote Yoda for a moment then, and as any video that quotes Yoda gets a plus from
The
that.
angry people of Paris, after centuries of cruel inequality, harsh oppression, even starvation, fearful of having their new movement for reform demolished so soon, decided that it was now or never to take action. Screw reform. They decided they'd do one better. How about revolution?
Ooh,
the people of Paris,
kicking off.
thinking the French military was preparing to attack, decided they should arm themselves. The National Assembly announced the creation of a bourgeois militia, the National Guard, and immediately many troops from the French military defected over to the revolutionary side. In the early hours of July 14th...
The bourgeois guard, that's such an interesting expression considering that bourgeois is now really associated with Marxists as a kind of critique. So it's interesting these guys self-identified as being bourgeois.
1789, a large crowd stormed and raided the Hôtel des Invalides, a military hospital where they were able to secure a large number of rifles. The bad news was they weren't able to find any gunpowder for their new weapons. The good news was
win
they
some,
knew
lose
exactly
some.
where to get some. A prison fortress and a symbol of royal tyranny towering over Paris.
The Bastille. Yeah.
Mid-morning, the crowd gathered around the Bastille and demanded that the man in charge, Governor Delaunay, surrender the prison and hand over the gunpowder. Obviously, Governor Delaunay was like, no way. So he stalled for time by inviting a few members of the crowd in for negotiations. The crowd, still waiting outside, quickly became impatient, and before long, they stormed the fortress, taking on the French troops inside. Your Majesty, we've received word that the people have surrounded the Bastille. Governor Delaunay will hold them off. No need to worry. Actually, Your Majesty, it appears the crowd is now headed away from the Bastille. You see? What did I tell you? Clearly Governor Delaunay has defeated them and has them on the run. No need to worry. Your Majesty, Isn't that Governor Delaunay's head on a pike? Well,
dude.
Clearly, Governor Delaunay has taken on the form of a bodiless pikehead deity, and the people are so enamored with him, they're parading him around the city.
Love this level of optimism. Wish I shared it.
No need to worry at all. When the National Assembly heard about the violence that had taken place, they had two options. Either one, they denounce it and try to carry on the revolution using peaceful means, or two.
But obviously, if they'd done that, they would then have separated themselves from kind of the more violent revolutionary masses. So that could well have been the end of the National Assembly.
Say, damn, you stuck his head on a pike? That's pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
And we love it. Incidentally, they went with option number two. Some historians believe this reaction paved the way for the utter violence and bloodshed that would become the legacy of the French Revolution. This widespread acceptance of violence during the Revolution is also largely credited to the writings of a certain Jean-Paul Marat, a man of science with a horrible skin condition that kept him confined to a bathtub. He began writing a radical newspaper he affectionately named The Friend of the People. Citizens
What, from his bathtub?
of France, be very afraid. Given the chance, the king and the nobility won't hesitate to massacre us all. The solution is simple. Execute them. Kill every last one of them. Cut off 1,000 heads. And if that's not enough, cut off 1,000 more. Oh, hey, Mr. Squeaky. What are you doing?
Is that what he actually wrote, or did he write something very sensible and then got it wet in the water? The ink ran, and no one really knew what he said, so they went with that. That's my question.
Down there. You're so cute. Aw, I love
It is interesting that some of the revolutions which use violence against their political enemies, even if it starts on quite a small scale. So I know I keep bringing this up, but the Bolsheviks, or the Russian Revolution and the French Revolution end up as complete tyrannies. I mean, this guy kind of sounds like a French Stalin. I mean, obviously, though, there are some revolutions that don't. So the American Revolution is an obvious one, which turned out to be a great success and created one of the freest societies on the planet, and didn't end up with George Washington becoming a dictator. So yeah, it's swings and roundabouts, I guess.
Love you too, Mr. Squeaky. Mwah. Now, where was I? Oh, yeah. Killed them all. It became one of the most popular publications in Paris during the Revolution and succeeded in spreading ever-increasing fear and anger among the people. In August, leaders of the National Assembly, with help from a certain Thomas Jefferson, adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the
So we're getting the American influence. I mean, the American Revolution was really important for the French Revolution.
Citizen, an incredible document that guaranteed liberty and equal rights to all men. And when I say men, I mean men. Despite its glaring shortcomings in gender equality, the massively influential declaration would go on to inspire the struggle for liberty and equality across the planet for centuries. However, back in France, the vast majority of the people weren't really so concerned with enlightened ideas of equality as much as they were concerned with the fact that they were still starving. Bread was still expensive as hell and hard to come by. The people felt that one reason nothing...
Oh, it's incredible how much progress human civilization has made just in a couple of hundred years. So this is a little over 2 centuries ago. And the society we live in, while still very troubled, is so much better for kind of the people at the bottom. And it kind of, I don't want to get hopeful, but maybe in 2 centuries' time, it will be so much better again. Let's hope. If you're watching this in 2 centuries' time and you're living in like some gulag and doing forced labour when you're not watching my YouTube videos because I become dictator, sorry about that, then yeah, it didn't go to plan. But let's hope.
Nothing had been done yet about the crisis was because the king simply couldn't see the problem. He lived in Versailles, a full 20 kilometers southwest of Paris, and as a result, lived in comfort, separated from his dirty, stinking subjects.
Apparently the Palace of Versailles was famously dirty and stinking as well. I mean, very, very, very elegant, but had a huge stench. I'd love to visit it sometime. It looks amazing.
On October 5th, a crowd of women, 7,000 strong, decided they'd do something unprecedented. They decided they'd remove that separation and confront the king directly. The women marched all the way to the king's palace in Versailles. Along the way, the crowd continued to grow.
So, as with the Russian Revolution, do not fuck with the women. If there's one thing you learn from this video, let it be that.
To the tens of thousands. And when they arrived, they demanded an audience with the king. What are those things outside the palace? They're poor people, your majesty. That's poor people? They say they're hungry. Hungry? Then let them eat cake. Wow. See, this is the exact...
I don't know if she actually genuinely said that, or if that's just like... I assume not. I may... If you know the answer, please do comment below. or whether that's just like a sort of summary of her opinion, which is part of the history. But obviously, that's like the iconic quote of the French Revolution.
BS that led to this whole mess in the first place. You're so out of touch.
Yeah.
They're writhing around in the filth, breaking their back to barely scrape by, and they come to you demanding just the basic ability to feed themselves, and you think a slice of cake will sort them out? Well, then let them eat Taco Bell Crunchwrap Supreme. Wow.
I don't really know what that is. I've never been to Taco Bell. It sounds quite nice.
They're not that desperate. Members of the crowd.
Okay, take that back. Apparently, it's not very nice. I'll make a mental note if I go to Taco Bell not to have that.
Actually managed to break into the palace with the intention of killing the queen, who narrowly escaped through a secret passage in her bedroom. The enraged mob killed several members of the royal guard and raised their heads on pikes, which, if you haven't noticed yet, is something they were quite fond of doing.
Yeah, I think they need to talk to someone about this. This is becoming a bit of an issue, the whole heads on pike thing.
He had no choice but to come out and talk to the crowd. He agreed to accept his new position, sharing power with the revolutionary government, and to return to Paris with the crowd, removing the separation between king.
So now we've got a formal dual power situation between the king and, I presume, the National Assembly is kind of the body that the peasants are demanding they share power with. But like dual power situations never last very long. That's one of the, or very rarely last long, especially not when they're so hostile to each other.
King and subject. King Louis had a problem with people constantly raiding his palace. But one thing he didn't have a problem with was people raiding his computer. He used NordVPN. If, like me, you don't like hackers stealing your data, password...
That is one hell of a claim. Louis XVI used it. If you can just get Louis XVI to endorse your product, I think that's pretty cool. So, and I'm not doubting it. I'm sure Louis XVI did use NordVPN. I'm sure he had an amazing laptop when he was streaming movies about, I don't know, eating cake. Is it cake, that one? I bet he and Anne-Marie love that.
Bank deets, and girlfriend, you need to check out NordVPN. With over 5,000 servers in 60 countries, it allows you to surf the net anonymously and safely.
Well, okay, so we clearly got to an advert. This is, and I say, go check out this service. Support the channel. And not just their channel, my channel as well. But no, that was really, really interesting. Not just Louis XVI using NordVPN, which I did not know. But no, I've learned a huge amount. So much of that I didn't know beyond the very basics. This is obviously only part one. So please join me again soon for part two and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.